mind if I ask you some questions about some
Go
stuff?
ahead.
So I've always been curious why, this group of individuals, when DFC was started, decided to start the Desert Fishes Council instead of trying to incorporate this into like American Fishery Society or ICS and HERPS. Why was this a standalone effort?
I think the best way to answer that is we felt we could be far more effective individually by forming a Desert Fishes Council. Of course, our membership is made up of people from the agencies you just suggested there. So we kind of could kill two birds with one stone that way. But it's been very effective working the way we have. We change presidents every 2 years. I was the first one beginning back about in 1969. It was just to get things rolling okay. I served as president then until about 1972 or 74. I can't remember which right now. And with us, every 2 years we do that, as you're well aware, being in the middle of it now. So that's kind of the history of DFC.
Yeah, one of the things that I really love about DFC is that it's a big enough organization to incorporate, federal, state, the on the ground, the boots, but it's small enough to where you can actually, engage with everybody at a meeting and, get to know each other. It's such a close knit group that it's my favorite organization to interact with. I mean, it's just fantastic.
I say that, but we tried to make it that way. So, we don't, we try to do it at DFC meetings. You go to the meeting, you tear off your shoulder patches, you forget who you work for. We're working together toward this common objective.
Yeah, and I think it's still that way, and I just absolutely love that. So there were so many things going on during this time period. Like you mentioned, the need for these recovery groups, a focus on Desert Fishes Council. Do you think there were any other factors that were kind of culminating during this time that helped with the solidification of the formation of DFC?
Probably the main one would be the gradual, although inexorable, activities of the different agencies pushing the Endangered Species Act. Because this was not very popular with, and it wouldn't be now either. You say under the Trump administration, they do everything they could to keep us from having something like that. So that was probably what, that would be the major advantage I would see from DFC as opposed to, say, Nevada Department of Wildlife, Cal Fish and Wildlife, so on and so forth. Same with federal agencies. Now, you're with the Fish and Wildlife Service?
Texas Parks and Wildlife.
Parks and Wildlife, okay.
Yeah.
Same with Gary Garrett.
Yes, yeah. Gary is one of my good friends and mentors.
Great guy.
So looking back over the last 52 years of DFC, what do you think have been some of the most meaningful kind of outcomes of, this synergy of everybody coming together and working together as a group?
Right off, in our first meeting, we began to set up recovery plans for the fishes. The first two were separated out of radiosis and fish sluices north of where I'm sitting now in Bishop. And then what would be the Endangered Species Act, I guess would be the spinoff from the federal agencies. It's been a very healthy thing that way. The feds never have a lot of money, but they have money they can spring loose to help in groups like that. But if I remember our first meeting, I'm standing up on the stage there at Death Valley. We kind of scratched our head, well, what can we do now? I think Bob Miller said, why don't we just set up a plan? So we did. We set up this plan for the recovery of the old pupfish. And it helps too, and that was one of Miller's major species when he did his dissertation. There's a long history there. So that would be the major things. Trying to think what else. Probably as much as anything, be the fact that I'm talking to you today and you're talking to me. For back in those days, you didn't do that so much. You'd write a letter to some director and gradually it filtered down through the communicative channel, and I might hear from you back again sometime, maybe in around Christmas if we're lucky. So that was the big thing. And like I mentioned, we'd like to maintain our autonomy to the sense that if you go to a meeting, I don't care if you're with the Texas Parks and Wildlife and I'm with Cal Fish and Wildlife. You still, you're two people working basically the same training, looking at things about the same, working together to solve these, bringing in other members. Like, okay, with Devil's Hole Pupfish, I work very carefully or closely with John Schoberg, who heads up Nevada's non-game work. Same thing all the way around in Arizona.
Yeah, you've had a fingerprint on a lot of different things throughout the year, Phil. It's pretty incredible to hear about.
Yeah, well, unusually, but I nothing really dramatic on my part. This is simply that I could see a need there, and somebody had to do it. So that first meeting I held in April of 69, yeah. That was the first meeting of the Desert Fisheries Council, even though it was not known as that yet.
So what impact do you think DFC specifically has had on not only professional but personal relationships through the last 52 years?
Well, what it did, it put names that you remember only legends, like Hubson Miller. And Joe Dokes, working for New Mexico Game and Fish, can phone them up and identify himself, and you got this world-class expertise right there at your fingertips. And you have to go around explaining, well, I have to send a letter to the director and back and forth. It becomes a one-to-one type relationship. That would be my main value there. And of course, we don't have a lot of money, but we have enough money if somebody needs to, like right now north of us here in Fish Slough, we have a problem there for a guy that raises alfalfa just outside of the slough. And he pumps water out literally 24 hours a day. This is dropping to springs in Fish Slough. We're trying to work now with lawyers to find out what our rights are as public servants to get that water at least acknowledged to a point where we can make sure those springs don't go dry. So, geez, I could sit here and probably talk to you all day on this.
I enjoy talking with you, Phil. Here's more of a lighthearted question. Is there a DFC meeting that stands out as particularly funny or something funny happened?
For a long time, we met, one in Mexico several times ago. Oh, the brother in Mexico, liquor is pretty easy to get. So I don't know how this ever happened. I kind of managed it. Did not happen while I was there on the spot, but we broke a toilet. We had to buy the Mexicans a new toilet. And there's little things like that. That's the one that just jumps into my mind. Trying to think of anything unusual. Yeah, we had some unusually good meetings, like we met in Cabo San Lucas a couple of years ago in the tip of Baja. And about anywhere you go down there, I'd say that one of the major things we've done, we just eliminated the Mexican-U.S. border. I mean, we go down there, they come up here, and the Mexican members of the council are really great members. They have a deep interest in it. They're as smart as we are, if not a lot smarter. The only difference is we are much better equipped north of the border to provide physical support. Like if they want to go somewhere, check out a spring, they got to find a car or a truck that they can rent or borrow from somebody in their agency and drive out to. We did this all the time, doing the initial collecting of the San Pedro Martyr trout. One of Gorgonio Ruiz is working on right now. He did a beautiful job. He published that. self-published, which I did a good job. So we don't really have, say, any differentiation between our biologists north of the border and the folks down there who are drawn together. We'll notice this probably next year when we meet at Quattro Ciénegas. Those are wonderful meetings.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it. It'll be my first time to see Quattro Ciénegas. I'm very excited.
Love it, yeah.
So what recommendations would you have for young professionals starting out in this, climate with conservation challenges, political, things going on right now? How would you encourage them, or what kind of advice could you give them to kind of as encouragement or perseverance, or how would you recommend that they just kind of start out their career strong?
First off, it's basic, the whole thing is their academic backgrounds. I think most universities now are broad enough. I was fortunate this way. I went to school at UC Berkeley, and my major prof there was Starker Leopold, Aldo Leopold's son. And so I learned so much just from his experience. Books that his dad wrote, the Sands County Almanac, literally is a marvelous piece of work. Mm-hmm. And that kept me going for a long time. Then I didn't change my major. I shifted over to Department of Philosophy. I wanted to examine the ethical responsibilities that I had in my job that were not necessarily required at all. But I knew if I was going to do this job properly, I had to have an ethical basis for it. Ethics being essentially the analysis of right and wrong. There's a great quotation in the San County Almanac. Leopold came up with this: a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It's wrong when it tends otherwise. So in my job here, much of which was just, okay, here in Bishop where I am, one of the major recreation areas of the world, we handle more recreation here than the combined uses of Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, and Glacier Park combined. Right, it's one national forest here. And so that's how I learned so much in applying that basic philosophy. Thing is wrong when it tends otherwise. But most of it, okay, here and back, this would have been the end of the Reagan administration in Washington. We had, who was this? It's a couple of guys who kept on top of things politically. They learned of a law called the Public Utilities Regulatory Policy Act, PURPA, that allowed entrepreneurs to divert a stream, take the water out of the stream, run it through a penstock into a power plant. Well, this, of course, was not a good thing for the fish resource. When we talk about species restoration versus public use. So we had to go to court over that and won it several times. And different people would, kind of like now when we're going through this, who's going to be the next president of the US kind of thing. So that's how I got involved in the ethical thing, because it was much less biological in its context than it was ethical in its context. Some of it just obviously was not right. It's hard though sometimes if you got sharp attorneys on the other side and they try to chop holes in your arguments. You stayed on top of that, I think.
So you've been with DFC from the very beginning. As you think about where we might be in 50 years, what do you think some of the lasting legacies for DFC will be for desert conservation?
Good question, Megan. since we started in '69, there's been quite a change in American perception of right and wrong in these things. I would say that back in that time, people were less concerned about their ability to take those streams, put them in a pipe, run through power plants than they would be now. There's been a big change there. This is why I was very pleased to note that Donald Trump got beat in the last election, because he was out to make money for him and his wealthy friends. So he was against preservation, was well on his way to eliminating the Endangered Species Act. It would have been a rough one to work out. So that's about all I can think of right off the bat.
So how do you think, as we move forward through conservation issues, how DFC can engage and help with issues in the future?
Time is important. So what we can do, as soon as we learn of some impending impact on a resource, we can begin to set up our defenses to keep this from happening. That I'd say would be the main thing. I've heard a good quote on that. Nothing jumps into my mind right now, but that would be the big thing. Just to what I want to say there. Eternal vigilance is the price of preservation, I guess, as much as anything.
No, that's good. So looking back towards those early meetings of DFC and some of the more recent ones we've had, how do you think the meetings within DFC have changed over the years?
They're becoming more sophisticated. Early on, we were concerned about just keeping the species alive and make sure their habitats are secure. Like out in Ash Meadows, we were scared to death there for fear we wake up some morning and somebody would have taken all the water and put it in a pipe, sent it to Vegas. So I'd say from that then, now you find papers, and to say the papers at our meetings, might add that these are all on the internet, all of our meeting proceedings. Anybody who wants to dig one out of the DFC files can do it. But more recently though, it would be more, we bring in genetics. We had to do a lot of work on, say, the California golden trouts. One, and the people at UC Davis and their genetics lab there have been very, they'd give papers, you find other people with some of the while things work kind of papers rather than the organizational end of it. Where'd you go to school?
I got my master's at Texas State here in Texas.
Okay. Texas State, where's that located?
San Marcos, just south of Austin.
Okay.
So I have to ask, looking back at the many projects and presentations that you've given at DFC, is there a presentation that you've given that you've particularly loved or really enjoyed presenting?
Yeah, that evolved too through the years. But what I tried to do, my running through some of these slides in my slide series in my mind, I tried to tune people into what ethics is, how you can apply ethics to the conservation of some fish that's maybe 20 millimeters long, stuff like that. Then going through some, got two great slides. I just made them available to somebody who's writing a book. They're two bumper stickers. One of them says, save the pupfish. Next one says, kill the pupfish. So we've had to deal with that kind of thinking. Save the pupfish, one of the good guys. A California legislator who viewed this as a personal threat to his farm here in the Central Valley somewhere. So this is these would be the two main types of things.
So I have to ask, looking back at your early career or getting started with DFC, who were some of your most formative mentorships that you had with, you know, other professionals, or who've really helped shape the way you view conservation?
The main one, okay, here I am. When I enrolled at Berkeley, I was in pre-med. I want to become a doctor necessarily. I knew what I wanted to do. How can you take some kid 17 years old out of a little dairy farm near the Central Valley where I was, and what are you going to be doing 50 years from now? No idea. So my brother was Dean of Engineering at Berkeley, ended up as Chancellor of UC Santa Cruz for 10 units at the University of California in California. And so he said, you know, Phil, I've been looking through the new general catalog. I think I found something you might be interested in. So he says, look up a guy in a life science building named Starker Leopold. He's setting up a brand new curriculum here at Berkeley in the wildlife conservation. So I did. I went down and saw Starker, talked to him for maybe 15 minutes or so, and my whole life changed direction. So I did this all the way through my undergraduate work into my graduate field and so on. So that would be the major one. And of course, Starker, the Leopold family, quite a bunch of people, about 6 of them. There's Starker and his brother Luna, who's passed away now. And Stella, the youngest daughter, was in a grad program at Berkeley when I was there. She was a paleobotanist of all things.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, learning what was here way back when. But she's a good one. And so those are the relationships, but there are others as well. There's a course there in the Berkeley set up for this type of thing in their Museum of Vertebrate Zoology, part of the life science complex. And so, and professors there, and out of that comes ZO 113, Natural History of the Vertebrates of California. So you learned about everything, birds, amphibians, reptiles, you name it. And so that one course, if I had to name one course in my whole university career, which is significant, I'd have to say that the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology and its faculty were among the top in my career development. My mother was in the Berkeley class of 1914, of all things.
That's amazing.
That really, women didn't go to college back then.
Yeah.
Mom put up with, Mary, you can't do this. You've got to stay home and have kids. Well, not mom. She was very different from that. She went to Berkeley. Interesting too. There's a guy named Horace Albright. Horace was one of the formers of the National Park Service. And Berkeley was small enough then. You could remember maybe your class members, classmates, and so on. This would have been probably about 1960, about 50 years later. Park Service asked me if I'd come over and take part in a symposium there in the Yosemite National Park on water use in the Park Service. There's really a bad example of water use there when they formed the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, took the Tuolumne River, and ran into this big reservoir. But that, from a good standpoint, that allowed San Francisco to develop. So that was an interesting thing. Okay, so Mom, I was sitting there, and my co-speaker there was Horace Albright. He and Stephen Mather were the two guys that kind of formed the Park Service back around Teddy Roosevelt's era, the early 1900s. So I noted when I was sitting in the speaker stand, Horace came in the back My mother was out in the audience. I could tell they looked at each other. My gosh, they remembered one another from 50 years ago.
Wow.
Berkeley was small enough then, you would remember class members. So they took about 2 hours after the program ended just talking about old times.
That's awesome.
So it came time for my brother and me to pick a school. She said, you guys better start deciding where you want to go to college. And I'll tell you this, unless it's Berkeley, you're paying your own way.
So Berkeley it was.
So we ended up at Berkeley. My brother Carl is an engineer. See what we did. When I was over here with the Fish and Wildlife Service, he'd come over, we'd backpack all over these mountains. Sometimes you have nothing better to do. It's called bishopweather.com. It shows a huge range of mountains that provide the western wall of the Owens Valley, where I am right now. bishopweather.com. There's a webcam there that keeps going all the time. Anything more you can think of, my dear?
I think that's it for now, but I really appreciate you taking the time to kick off our virtual meeting this year and sharing your experience and your
Pleasure.
wonderful talk every year. I appreciate it, Phil.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.